Welcome all. This is becoming an annual event that we gather. That we gather to somehow either to celebrate those who retire or to welcome those who come to Hunter. And this particular year, our provost asked me if we could have a little conversation about research, ongoing research at Hunter, for Latino research at Hunter. Now, for full disclosure, before I let our provost say a few words of welcoming to you, I have to admit that I have ulterior motive in co-sponsoring these events. You know, not only we like to promote Latino studies, Puerto Rican Latino studies at Hunter, but somehow we have to figure out a way to harness the undergraduate and the graduate efforts that go on, and to somehow bring us together in more programmatic ways. Now, I don't want to go too far in this direction because I may actually reveal too much of what I have in mind, but I will encourage all of us to think a little bit about how we all can play a role in institutionalizing what this is today, an informal effort. See if we can come up with structures that allow our pedagogy and our research to converge and to create an environment of Latino intellectual development and intellectual encouragement and intellectual endeavors that actually do justice to all the talent that we have here at Hunter. So having said that, and I don't want to preclude too much our provost, but it's my pleasure to introduce Vida Rabinowitz to you all. She's very well known to all of us. I don't think that anyone has been hired in this college that she hasn't met or somehow reviewed, but I have to say that with respect to the issues that we care and that we're going to be discussing today, she's really a big supporter of us, and I would like to welcome her to say a few words of welcoming to you. Vida?
I love this event, faculty. It means a great deal to me. I will tell you that this year, for the first time, after 33 years at Hunter, I received an award based in part on making a contribution to higher ed as an Italian-American woman. And that meant more to me than anything else in any award I have received. And so I feel very close to the Latino faculty group here, because I have a sense of the multiple missions and aspirations that you have, and how very important it is that we have growing number of you at Hunter College. Right now, a little over 20% of our undergraduate population identifies as Latino, a slightly smaller percentage of graduate students, and among faculty, something like 12% of our faculty. Faculty are growing every year. Undergraduate population seems to have leveled off, graduate population increasing slightly. Retention rates among Latino students is improving, and graduation rates are improving. So we have much to celebrate among Latino students and Latino faculty who are in positions of leadership all throughout Hunter and CUNY. I wanted to bring up a few recent current initiatives, though, where I think you can make a very big difference to the college. And I wanted to bring you up to date on some recent trends. We are making exciting hires throughout the college, and Latino initiatives are right in the middle of them. In the Department of Art this year alone, we hired 2 faculty whose specializations are Latin American art, Harper Montgomery and Linda Klitsch. Superb scholars, curators, and teachers. And their goals, they were hired with the particular responsibility of raising awareness of Latin American art, Mexican and Latin American art throughout the college. You're going to see public programming, you're going to see new courses, and you're going to see faculty development opportunities around Latin American art in the near term. One of the things I would like you, so there are initiatives like this throughout. Edwin, I want to thank Edwin's leadership of the Centro. His heart and soul is in advancing Latino faculty and students. So many wonderful initiatives on the and so in tune with our new strategic plan that I'm going to talk about. Edwin's initiatives in the areas of increasing helping our students to be more culturally competent as they enter the professions. Initiatives like working with our School of Social Work, our School of Education, reaching out to School of Arts and Sciences and saying, partner with me, please. Let's offer courses together. Let's revamp the curriculum together. Again, this is priceless to us. But there are a few initiatives I wanted to bring to your attention because I would love you, no matter what your disciplinary home, to think about joining in. As you may know, at the end of April, the Hunter community embraced a new strategic plan that has a few planks that I just want to call to your attention. Okay. This is a 2-year a strategic plan that we developed over 2 years, and here are our goals. And what I challenge you to think with me about where you and your mission and your passions fit in. First, to enhance Hunter's academic identity as an emerging university via research, more faculty and student research, and interdisciplinary programs. Okay. Second, to increase student engagement and student success. Third, build a strong sense of place for Hunter by improving and optimizing existing facilities and by finding new facilities. And finally, strengthening Hunter's financial foundation via grants, awards, philanthropy, and other initiatives. Folks, as I know you know, we're already implementing the plan. The new Silberman School of Social Work in East Harlem that will house central archives and the library is just one down payment on our plans for the future. We're seeking new spaces. We're trying to make better use of existing space. You're going to see our library completely renovated. President Rapp hopes to raise $35 million to redo the 68th Street Library alone. We are forming partnerships in East Harlem. Our School of Social Work has now contracted with 98 agencies in East Harlem to create opportunities for our students to do their clinical work, to do their internships in agencies. I just left a meeting with the Dean of Education, former New York State Commissioner David Steiner, who's talking about partnering with the Silberman School of Social Work and the new CUNY School of Public Health at Hunter College, also located in East Harlem. The point is, we need all hands on deck for our East Harlem partnerships, which mean the world to us right now. We would love your thoughts about what kinds of initiatives are worth pursuing, how your talents and skills might be used to create more collaborations and a more meaningful partnership between Hunter and East Harlem. We also want to know, what can we do to support your careers? It's not we're asking much of you all the time, but it's my job to make sure that we're supporting you, to to get tenured, promoted in a timely fashion, that more of you seek to be named chairs and distinguished professors. I know there are folks on that track in this room right now. We want to hear about, are you writing books for which you need some money to seed your work? There's a new presidential fund for faculty advancement. I encourage you to apply. It's not too late. Apply for funds through that. Apply for travel funds. In other words, please use us and challenge us. Hunter is at a transitional point. We're going from a teaching-intensive place to a research and teaching-intensive institution. We're always proud to be a teaching-intensive institution. We're also looking for leadership and Latino leadership throughout the college. Are you interested in academic administration? Are you interested in heading a major college-wide committee? Come and talk to me. Is there something that we should be doing for you as an individual or for the groups that matter to you that we're not doing? So I really welcome your ideas. You have a friend, I know you know this, you have a friend in Edwin, you have a friend in Arlene Torres, you have friends in this room, but I hope you also feel you have a friend in the provost's office. And again, you're going to see many initiatives where you can join in. The final one, I'm going to mention two other things very quickly. Arts across the curriculum. We just received a $100,000 planning grant, a relatively small grant, but it's from the Mellon Foundation. And it's to infuse arts across all the curriculum, whether it's the sciences, the philosophy, you name it. If you are already doing this work, or you have ideas for how Hunter's rich arts programs or other things can improve your teaching, your pedagogy, your curricula, please get in touch with me. We've got a little money and we're eager to spread it around, and what we're hoping is we can apply for a larger grant, a $2 million grant next year. Also, I wanted to, and I'm sure others will be announcing this, but the ribbon cutting for the new Silberman School of Social Work in East Harlem is this week. So that beautiful, gracious building, I mean, after Roosevelt House, it's the prettiest place we have. That beautiful building will open this week, formally. There will be a gala the following week honoring Dennis Rivera, the great labor leader, the national figure in labor relations. And there will be a wonderful art exhibit with a particular focus on Puerto Rican art that is being, that I believe Susanna Laval is curating it, and our good friend Juan Flores will be back for this. So anyway, please look for this wonderful inaugural event to open up the galleries in the art gallery at the new space.
The Latin American philosophy, but we're also going to have a section on Latino issues in philosophy that are particularly related to Latinos, such as identity issues, race issues, the concept of mestizaje, immigration issues, because there's a real explosion of work among Latinos in philosophy on these topics. So it'll be a course that bridges Latin American and Latino issues. We're teaching it through the honors program next semester for the first time. Try that out, but we want to make it a regular part of the curriculum. So please send us your students. And the other thing that I work on is the work of Enrique Dussel, who is one of the most important Latin American philosophers currently living. He's published like 40 books. So I have a paper on his concept of transmodernity coming out, and some other papers on his work.
At 450, so it's a significant number of individuals who are seeking to become clinicians through our Hunter program. And as a result of that, one of the studies that you see that I have here is that's being funded through a PSC grant, together with a colleague of mine at the graduate school, Dr. Samuel Amer. we have become very interested in looking at the trajectory of both Black and Hispanic males who have come to our program with the desire to train as clinicians. And we have become very interested in looking at the trajectory of this population who have opted to enter a female-dominated discipline, and more importantly, to train in an ethos of care, clinical care, that by and large within our profession, as most helping professions, women oftentimes opt to do. And so we are doing a qualitative study through the use of focus group research to really examine how this population truly describes their experience in training as clinicians, B, what has brought them into this encounter, and what we would like to see is how that information can impact pedagogy. And when I look at the numbers that our provost really mentioned, with only 20, was it 20%? 20%. At the end of graduate, I get very excited when I teach a class and I see either an African American student or a Hispanic student, because by and large, pursuing graduate studies, because that means they've survived the undergraduate experience and they're forging ahead. What we're finding, which is very interesting, that for many Hispanic graduate students, both male and female, that they are pursuing the degrees at a very high cost while also being oftentimes a provider of financial resources to their family, caring for either older adults or elderly parents. And so we find that they are dealing with multiple stressors while also meeting the demands of graduate education. We also find that for them, it has been a very personal experience that has led them to pursue a career in a clinical mental health profession. So that's also very interesting for us. And secondly, you'll see that through the support of the Georgia and Schuster Fellowship, I am under contract with Columbia University, and I'm writing a book that really looks at integrating the science of ecology, environmental psychology, also with psychodynamic theory, and developing a model of clinical social work treatment that is really predicated on these principles. And in our profession, there's always been a war around whether or not we should really be caring for people through social reform versus individual treatment. And the argument is that the bifurcation that exists in our discipline really has created such dissonance and destruction, that it's not one or the other, but that it's actually both. And now that our school is actually in East Harlem, we begin to see both the social inequities of any given society or community, but we also see the cost of such social inequities on the psychological and mental health functioning of individuals. So what I'm excited about is that when we look at the literature, very few Hispanics have really contributed to that dialogue in our discipline. And so therefore, I hope to be one of the first to be able to engage in that conversation. So thank you.
Although my research is not obviously focused on Latino problems, I'm from Latin America, so that gives me a very strong element to be in touch with a lot of Latin American, Latino students over the years. And I became a little of a model, and you see a different approach. So especially for women, and the problem is sometimes that they face is the family issues and cultural background, and probably their first generation in their family that they are in the college. So a personal support is very important, and so far I have been very successful. Most of them finish their undergrad student studies, and they go to graduate schools in very great positions. My research is about control of gene expression under DNA damage, and we are doing some research in not the traditional way that is transcription or protein, but the RNA stability. So that's more or less our research, and that's all about us.
We have 17 science, technology, and math enrichment programs at Hunter. Most, not all of them, but most of them focused on underrepresented groups, including Latinos. And our students do incredibly well in these programs. They go on to medical school and graduate school. But there are issues that many groups of our students face, particular challenges, whether it's the racism that you, Linda, talked about, or it's feeling responsible for the family and being torn between work and school, that Vida, that you mentioned, or it is wondering about whether one can pursue a career in the science, male or female, given all that the hard sciences demand to be successful. The 70-hour work weeks, the almost. You know, I talk, women in science is what is my research interest and passion. And I remember once talking to a group of women postdocs at Princeton who were phenomenally successful. They were postdocs in mathematics at Princeton, and only 50% of them intended to go on to faculty positions. So we lose people all along the way, people with the talent, people. And the question is, what are the factors that lead to that? I'm not suggesting that 100% of those women should have sought faculty positions. Not at all. People have multiple goals in life. But the point is that this is a great place to discover that where this is you work on and you deal with is that supporting people in very tough careers who have very different kind of pulls and presses in their lives is, you know, something we need to talk about as a community. So, thank you.
I hope we can take it even a step further, that perhaps coming together, this group of faculty here might be the start of really putting into concrete form some supports and special programs that really might address directly getting more of the Puerto Rican Latino students here at Hunter involved in being able to do that and doing it as early as possible.
Right.
I think
that's
going
key.
Beyond talking about it, we need to, I think, maybe use all the talent and resource here to really channel do something. That, I would like to just support something like that.
And so a few years ago, most of my research and publications dealt with politics in Puerto Rico. I'm trying to expand that. I'm trying to expand the view of what is Puerto Rican politics to include the politics of the Puerto Rican diaspora in the United States. And I'm beginning to do this through a subject that has been not extensively studied, that is the political implications of Puerto Rico's migration policies, particularly I'm trying to answer what I think is an important issue: why the Puerto Rican government, the colonial government of the U.S., engaged in migration. That's not what the literature usually pays attention to. That is, migration policy is usually seen as one element that is managed by nation states. So here you have a very peculiar situation where a colonial government assumes functions usually identified with nation states. So I'm trying to delve into that issue, and that has led me to issues dealing with the relationship between Puerto Rico and the U.S., the nature of Puerto Rican citizenship, the nature of the U.S. citizenship of Puerto Ricans, and so forth. So I'm hoping to publish this research very soon in a book, which is what appears in the book. Thank you.
I'm a counseling psychologist, and as a member of the counseling faculty in the SEEK department, I've been privileged to engage in two scholarly endeavors and research in the past few years that are very close to my heart in terms of what I like to do. And one of them recently was the development of an online educational multimedia, online educational career planning multimedia tutorial. And basically, I'm trying to integrate the use of technology in a meaningful way to the delivery of counseling services in my department. So the tutorial has gone live. It's used as part of our Orientation for Success course in the department. And one of the unique features about the tutorial is that it combines information. You know that students need information for their educational career planning, but it has also brought into play by including video clips and video interviews with our Hunter Seek alumni. And We know that from research that students, especially underrepresented students in higher education, this is very meaningful to students to have information being presented by role models like themselves. And I think the tutorial has successfully accomplished this. We've had some very good responses in our user testing, and we look forward to getting even more user testing information to help us improve on it. But for starters, I have that tutorial that just went live, and this is a project that was funded by the CUNY Office of Special Programs, and it was funding from the SEEP department as well. And the second project that also is very important to me has been a project out of a Faculty Fellows Research Award that I got that focused on the undergraduate experiences of Puerto Rican Latino students in CUNY. And essentially I engaged in some survey research at 5 CUNY colleges using 59 mixed measurement variables. And I was able to get volunteers at various schools, 663, to provide information about their experiences in CUNY. We used Hunter and City College as the senior colleges, and BMCC, LaGuardia, and Ostos Community College. And just to highlight two main points from the research, essentially, language issues still are a very predominant concern for our students, and this is very important that usually this is a make or break situation, how proficient our students are, especially in writing. And unfortunately, from the survey, I learned that many of the students don't use the college facilities like tutoring to help them address its concern. It's a very important concern, and it's expressed frequently, especially given the different demographic now that we have here in CUNY in terms of Latino population. But they're not helping themselves, and I think this is a big retention issue for our students. And one of the other findings is that, based on some of the concerns maybe that Frida, you mentioned about the students, how they feel about dealing with the circumstances they face in college, they are turning more to friends and people outside of the family to be able to help them to resolve issues and adjust to college. However, I think they're still not getting enough information about the various resources available, but they did express, at 78% of them did express that they're willing to take advantage of counseling services, and I think probably more needs to be done to really communicate how counseling can help, and I think that's something that I think probably in terms of the work that Manny you do, probably could be very interesting as well. So that's in a nutshell what I've been involved in.
I've been fortunate to work with Centro and Manny in social work, and Ivan Megatano in education, and others on the cultural competency curriculum development that Centro has spearheaded. So that's been really excellent, and we've been rolling, we've helped develop a module for cultural competency in public health at the graduate level, and we've been rolling it out over the past couple of semesters, and it's taken on a life of its own. So that's been a great opportunity to work with Centro. The couple of things that are noted in the book, I guess I'll work backwards. The St. Vincent's Community Health Assessment has been a really, I think, exciting opportunity for Hunter School of Public Health in particular, because through work with the President's Office, we've been, I think, instrumental in working with the West Village Chelsea community in trying to get a concrete and empirical sense of what's happened in that part of New York City since St. Vincent's Hospital closed a little over a year ago. So that's been a community partnership endeavor that has also included the New York City's Council, Christine Quinn's office, and several of the community boards there. And in fact, tonight we're presenting at Community Board 2. So that has not only been, I think, professionally a nice opportunity to do some New York City-based work, but also it's given Hunter a presence as a newly accredited school of public health in doing work that's New York City-based. So I think that's been terrific. And actually we're looking at that as a model for some work we're just in the early phases of trying to develop with colleagues at the School of Social Work in East Harlem around health assessment and community partnerships. So that's one. And then the other is a project. Somebody told me that the acronym was really bad. It's SPAF. Sounds like spam. But anyway, it's an NIH-funded project that I have that just started its 4th year. It's a 5-year grant that's looking at factors, decision-making around family formation, from relationships to childbearing and everything in between. And while on the face of it, it doesn't appear to have a particular focus on Latino communities or populations, the inspiration for that work has been earlier work that I've done around changes in welfare policies, welfare reform, and the potential impact of those changes on maternal, child, and reproductive health. And if it's welfare, we're talking specifically about poor and low-income families, and disproportionately that includes communities of color. So around decision, relationship and family formation decision-making, there's a lot of literature and I guess demographic analyses that point to poor families and oftentimes poor women in particular, and that's oftentimes meant to focus specifically on Latina and African American women and their very problematic family formation behaviors, irresponsible childbearing, and lack of family values around marriage, etc. And there's been very little, aside from large-scale national demographic analyses that have led to these, I guess, conclusions, which I don't think are very well informed. There's been very little qualitative work in that regard. So we just finished collecting or conducting 200 in-depth interviews. I said 200 in-depth because that was a lot of work, in different parts of New York City and northern New Jersey with men and women and of, a fairly diverse socioeconomic and racial ethnic sample, so that we hope to begin to provide a little more understanding as to what drives decisions around family formation, not only among the poor Latinas and African American, families that tend to be focused on, but also how different, if at all, that might be from more affluent, dominant population groups. So we're really hoping that this will provide more information that's currently out there on that.
And so when I was doing the research there, what struck me the most was that instead of the VKS movement relying mostly on sort of the traditional political nationalism of the nationalist or the cultural nationalism, and these elements were there in VKS, but what struck me the most was how health was one of the main elements that really helped the movement to organize and mobilize and transcend traditionally almost impossible political boundaries. Since in Puerto Rico, the two-party system, it's pretty hard to break those kinds of boundaries. And VKS was able to do so, to get people from all parties to participate. And part of the argument I'm making in my book is that part of the reason they were capable of doing that was because the way in which they organized, they emphasized issues of health that obviously transcend traditionally defined notions of identity. And that's sort of one of the elements. Right now I'm also working on sort of integrating my own narrative on civil disobedience as a way of juxtapose it against how people got involved in the VKS movement. So the book is going to have a double narrative, my narrative and the narrative of the people in VKS as they were engaging, and obviously from anthropological perspectives. And the second project that I just finished, that's the Puerto Rican and the green jobs gap in New York City. I was just basically interested in finding out, given the fact that there is this push within the Obama administration making available all kinds of federal monies for the development of green jobs and green technologies. was really curious as to whether or not Latinos and other minorities and Puerto Ricans, of course, are actually targeted in any way, shape, or form, particularly in New York City. And what I found was that none. There is no any sort of systematic attempt on the part of the city or the state to really take advantage of making these new jobs available to minorities. And I was struck by this in part because particularly among Puerto Rican populations in New York City, who have been at the center of the environmental social movement, who have very strong community-based organizations, from the point of view of workforce development, it would make all the sense to somehow take advantage of this community workforce development tied to environmental movements and to facilitate and to make more available jobs to Puerto Ricans and other minority groups. And so that's basically the argument of this work, this paper, this article I just finished, that if and obviously within the economic situation in which we are, the ones most affected the most in terms of access to jobs are minority groups, including Puerto Ricans. So it would make a lot of sense to really target these CBOs as a way of accessing this labor force, some tap labor force. Thank you.
I'm based at the School of Education, and so that's a really important location for me and for work in Central, because it's only recently that the scholarship that exists in Central has really been tapped by those of us in teacher education for no other reason than that teacher educators in general are very busy people. And I am now retired, teaching no more 7 courses a year, so I can devote myself fully to this kind of work. So I think it's important to know that it's not for a lack of interest that we haven't tapped the resources. But in 2000, working in this interdisciplinary group of scholars that included historians and archivists, I, as the one teacher educator, was responsible for seeking to find pedagogical applications for the work, for the archives. Mind you, I knew personally very little directly about the archives. So I say that to highlight the fact that in this work, I have found myself in history, and I have lost myself in history. And my students who come from very different places have also found themselves in history. And so I think it's very powerful work in the sense that we're going into the archives. My personal interest is in the archives of writers, because I'm in literacy, I'm a literacy educator. And therefore, my students, when they go to the schools, they don't find any writings of our local writers as well as writers from the island. Actually, when I went to Puerto Rico and I talked about Vida Rabinowitz and the archives that we have been using for Vida Rabinowitz, the first Puerto Rican librarian in New York City, who wrote extensively and has her archives here, the students at the University of Puerto Rico that I spoke to didn't know who Vida Rabinowitz was. So we're talking about, it's not about we know some things and we're always in the process of becoming. And this work, working with the archives, has allowed that to happen. So, but I was personally motivated, not just by the fact that I work with teachers in District 4 first and foremost, and now in the city, work with teachers in El Barrio, and the teachers that, the pre-service teachers knew very little about El Barrio. So that led to then thinking about how to create that knowledge, and we started with community knowledge, with community experiences. However, tying it to literacy, it was when we went into, actually, I was invited to go into the Jesus Colón archives, and I took my students to Central to visit, and they were wondering, what does Jesus Colón have to do with the course? And I was wondering, who was Jesus Colón? Because I didn't know he was the leading thinker behind what is referred to as the New Rican writers' renaissance. And so we have been working, or I work with my students using the archives to create products that they could use in their classrooms. Because the only way we can change curriculum is not to talk about it, but to actually do it with the students. So we have to provide the products that they can use. And so the research that I do is not research like what many of you do. It's research in which you are generating useful knowledge at the service of improving the conditions of the community. And so I'm going to have to simplify this because it's just too complicated to go on now. But I am officially retired and I continue to do this work. And now that I have the time, I can theorize and develop it further in terms of the importance of tapping cultural products and cultural resources to develop new identities.
Currently working on a book about Latino political life in San Francisco from about the 1930s to the 1970s. Now, why San Francisco? Usual question, or a common question that I get. And I chose San Francisco because in the mid-20th century, early mid-20th century, San Francisco had a Latino population that in many ways provided, anteceded the way that cities would look like in the late 20th century, early 21st century. So in 1935, 1940, San Francisco had peoples of Mexican origin alongside Chileans, Salvadorans, Nicaraguans, and Puerto Ricans. So it's not a project about migration, it's a project about political life. I'm interested in political activism, the evolution of the political, everything from labor union organizing in the 1930s and 1940s to feminist politics and gay and lesbian politics in the 1960s and 1970s, and in between a lot of material about anti-poverty politics in the 1960s, civil rights activism in the 60s, church politics in the 1950s and 1960s as well. So it's an attempt to think about political history broadly, not just about labor unions or not just about feminists, but getting labor historians to think about, okay, where are there some linkages between what labor organizers were doing or theorizing or thinking about in the 1940s and what feminists were arguing for in the 1960s and 1970s, et cetera, et cetera.
The reason that we did this study is to draw attention to the fact that artists of color in New York City, for the most part, work not within the art world, but within fields of often social work, community-based organizations, not-for-profit organizations. And that in itself, I think, is extremely important when you do arts policy, to recognize that when you create these art, there's a famous program called Artists in the Marketplace. And the idea, generally speaking, in New York and in many other international cities is if you're an artist, you're supposed to really make your mark in the commercial art world, become collected, go into museums. But for many artists, especially who come from working class backgrounds, they consciously choose to go back and integrate art and work within communities. That puts them in an inadvantageous position when it comes to evaluating the work and the work being recorded in history as important. So, and also in the way that arts policy and money within a city is divvied up. Because when Mayor Bloomberg, for example, decides to create a project, he wants to hire an illustrious artist, usually from the global circuit. And not very much money is put within community-based organizations to create local projects because they're seen as minuscule. So we wanted to draw attention, number one, to where our artists are working, make sure that maybe some money is put into initiatives like social entrepreneurship in the arts, and also value this work and say that it is just as important to have these community-based organizations, often where artists get their first start, and how these community organizations are the place where people go on to go to the Whitney Biennial and MoMA and the Met. So that was one study that we did, and I also discussed my criticisms of Richard Florida's idea of a creative class as an economic engine, because honestly, I often, artists are an economic engine, but they don't benefit when communities that they go into are gentrified. They're often the first ones to leave. So out of this work really comes out of many years, being born here in New York and being part of many wonderful art movements. And so my work, the book that I'm writing, is specifically about the Puerto Rican art movement in New York. And it, in contrast to sort of traditional art history books that only focus on artistic production, on integrating the artistic production, but also discussing the circulation of these posters throughout these community-based groups, and the social activism of the artists to continue to sustain these community-based organizations. So it has a little bit of the social activism as well as the art, trying to integrate it and also map the places of circulation, often they're not in major museums, of this work that is nevertheless very valuable. Thank you.
The Orlando community, particularly in Central Florida and Orlando, is having kind of a major impact in the whole state, and actually even nationally. There's attention of all political campaigns are constantly coming to Orlando, so it's kind of intriguing how that's happening. But the community there also is, I'm really kind of in the midst of this research, so it's still developing, but the community there is, I would argue, you can't really kind of think about community formation using, say, the sorts of models that have been developed over studying the history of New York and so forth. It's a cross-class migration, and it's also people who are coming from everywhere. So you have people who've lived their whole lives in Puerto Rico and are moving to Orlando, people with others who have maybe spent most, if not all, their lives in New York, and Chicago, and Miami, and California, and so forth, all coming into this area. So what I've gotten very interested in is thinking about memory and the kinds of cultural identifications that emerge with the different kinds of experiences that people have had in different Puerto Rican communities, and how those are playing out in the efforts to create social relationships, cultural identifications, and from that the political action to create a real presence with this community in Florida. And I have a second project which is kind of it's small and probably just going to be like an article, but it's given me, the memory piece has given me an excuse to go back to something I wondered about for many years. I did my dissertation research in education in Puerto Rico, and while I was doing that, I was in Santa Isabel and near the Central Cortada in Santa Isabel, and they had a festival there. So I went. It had nothing to do with my research, but I just went with people that I was with in the community. And there was this amazing kind of nostalgia about the life, and they like replanted a Flamayan, and it was all of this talk, and I was like, huh? It just really didn't make a whole lot of sense to me what this nostalgia was all about. So I've always been very curious about that, but not had a real opportunity to work with it. And just before I came to Centro, I was in Puerto Rico and was starting a series of interviews around that. And so it's become a little bit my excuse to think some more about memory in that context, and what that piece of life in Santa Isabel, how that plays out now also, and the place where it all happened, which is now no longer obviously a functioning sugar central, and is about perhaps to be demolished in order to build a bunch of wind turbines. So it's kind of the social action around that is also interested me, and I'm just doing a small piece on that.
I'm a clinical psychologist. You have my lecture series, and so part of my time is teaching. Teach a course, and I do a series of lectures, and the other part of the time, which is not obviously half either, is research related. But my passions relate to the areas that I lecture on, and one is looking at Puerto Rican diasporic identity. One, of course, is our youth identity, particularly adolescent identity, and looking at it from multiple perspectives, not the traditional perspectives in psychology, but from the transnational hybrid person that is emerging in the United States and in Puerto Rico, and the crossovers and mixings of that hybrid personality and that hybrid person. So I have an article related to a critical review of the literature on Puerto Rican and Latino adolescent identity formation, which Maria might be interested in, and a couple of folks, from a very critical perspective. The other area that relates to some of the comments that Patricia made is looking at the findings, the mental health, so-called mental health findings from a national survey. It's a public health data that comes out every so many years. But looking at it to question what it says, given that the findings repeatedly for Puerto Ricans in mental health indicate that the Puerto Ricans in the United States have worse mental health than all the other ethnic groups, and in many cases comparable to American, Native Americans, First Nation people. The theoretical basis of the work that has gone previously I find wanting and lacking, in that it doesn't look at the whole complex structure of the experience of the Puerto Rican people in the diaspora. It does not consider the long extending roots of the colonial experience that gets lived out in the United States in different ways. It's interesting that amongst one of the most interesting findings is that Puerto Ricans who have been longer in the United States and who are more English speaking are also the more psychologically distressed. When you look at that and do not consider a context, a critical context, and the context of nostalgia and the context of colonial trauma or historical trauma, if you don't look at that, then you're at a loss. Well, why should the Puerto Ricans, be worse off? So you start thinking of, are they poorer? Are they less educated? Are they underemployed? And you start looking at all those. But even if we look at all those factors, I will argue, and that's what I want to argue, and with this I will conclude, that the Puerto Rican experience, like the Native Americans, like those people who have suffered from historical trauma, we too suffer from historical trauma that we have worked out through, and this, the psychoanalytic part of me is coming out, that we have worked through in different ways, particularly creativity, through music, but also through nostalgia. We are a Puerto Rican people that are constantly wanting to recreate that which we have lost, but we're not too clear what it is that we have lost. Some of us say patria, others say we are constantly seeking to recreate it. So I want to combine some of that experimental data, some of that data that has been obtained with an analytical focus it's a renewed analytical focus. It combines historical trauma, it combines critical psychoanalysis, and it combines looking at the colonial experiences of different people in this case, ours.
And I have three kind of major projects going on. The first is with Edwin. We're getting ready to introduce a nationwide survey of groups across the United States to assess the impact of the recession on the quality of work in the United States. And that is pulling off my work that I've done in the informal economy in Africa, the decline of quote-unquote good jobs in the United States, the comprehensive job that gave you health care, full-time worker benefits, etc. The second study is related to the so-called disconnected youth. There's problems with that term, I know. Happy to talk to you guys about that at some point if you're interested. In New York City, that we're getting ready to work. It's a project that's right now under consideration by a couple of foundations for funding, and it's looking pretty promising. And then there's a broader portion of that project that's a nationwide study done in conjunction with researchers at the University of California. We're hoping to pull in some people from Florida as well as from New York, CUNY, and SUNY, looking at youth patterns of attachment to their community and kind of comparing that, the so-called disconnected populations and the quote-unquote connected populations, to see exactly where does the community question or the patterns of attachment to various community organizations and networks and policy circles impact life outcomes for youth.
Please.
And yes, the Pathways Project, which we just wrapped up, which a couple of people in the room were involved in, this is looking at Puerto Ricans in low-wage jobs and labor markets in the United States. It is the focus of the next issue of the Central Journal, which should be coming out in about a week or two, I believe. I have no idea. But it's got a lot of interesting research that was sponsored by the Ford Foundation, so it's a good read.
As director of the Latino Faculty Initiative, I've been working rather diligently across the CUNY campuses to deal with retention as of late. Because of fiscal and budgetary constraints, we have had more of a difficult time recruiting in the last year and a half. And so as part of the initiative, I've been working to try and think strategically with human resources and with the diversity office at Central to consider what kinds of approaches we can take to better retain and to make sure that people are tenured and promoted through the ranks. And so that's more of the work that I'll be involved in this year, and certainly with an eye all the time to who I might potentially recruit to the CUNY system. And so that is always ongoing, whether it's on the short term for the following academic year or 2 or 3 years down the line. And so if you know people who are interested in making a move, it may not happen sometimes within a year, but it may happen a little further downstream. Please bring those individuals to my attention, because we really do need to enhance the faculty ranks throughout the system, the Latino faculty more generally, and the Puerto Rican faculty more specifically, which continues to be on the decline. As far as my work as a researcher, I continue to be actively involved in my own writing. Most recently, published a piece having to do with urban anthropology, comparative work that will appear in Oxford University Press in about a year or so, and entries, those encyclopedic entries that some of you have written and probably hate as much as I do, but nonetheless need to be published. I just recently finished one on Puerto Ricans in the United States. And I'm also actively working on, both as a researcher, but in part of my role as director of the Latino Faculty Initiative, and as member of the executive committee of the Puerto Rican Studies Association, to really engage in a dialogue about the future of Puerto Rican studies and Latino studies more broadly, and what kinds of things we need to think about theoretically, methodologically, and institutionally. And to that end, the Puerto Rican Studies Association is going to have a conference here on October 29th, Saturday morning from 10 to 2, open to the public, so that we can engage in that kind of dialogue. And there have been some invited speakers, but I really want to encourage everybody to attend, because we really want to hear from you as to what the issues are and what kind of research agendas we should be thinking of well into the 21st century. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
The time that I've been here, I've been working with Edwin on getting funding for and executing a project funded by the Fund for the Improvement of Post-Secondary Education on cultural competence, working with colleagues around the table. So I like to think of myself as the glue. Dr. Manny Gonzalez from the School of Social Work, Dr. Diana Romero, School of Public Health, several professors in the Department of Urban Planning, and Dr. Yvonne de Gaetano, now retired, in the School of Education. And a product of all of their work together, we're hoping to have soon to be able to get to those of you who participated and others in the conference that we held, proceedings, which includes the research briefs and annotated bibliographies around culture, identity, and Puerto Rican Latino communities in social work, public health, education, and we're working this year, and we've just gotten a report from the Department of Urban Planning, their project. They're catching up with the work that was done in the other 3 schools. And so I like to take credit, but actually in pushing, supporting, collaborating with my colleagues in the schools to get this work done, and to see that research, see, I come from Aspida where awareness, analysis, and action are 3 legs, and the analysis is the research, the awareness is the sense of identity that Aspida and that creates a centro. The action is turning the research work and the identity into policy, program, curriculum, and so we're glad to see modules being produced that can be incorporated into the School of Public Health preparation of the students, and other faculty can use it, in the same with the materials in the School of Social Work, that it would be available for case studies and readings in different courses, and that same process is happening in the urban planning. The other piece of my interests are about the Puerto Rican Latino education pipeline, and that's work that Centro is doing in data collection and analysis. And I look at it more from a policy perspective, as someone who has been a policy maker, a college professor of teacher education, and a community advocate. And so again, I see my role and contribution, having worked and taught at 4 different community colleges, to be the glue, to act as the glue with our regent, like Puerto Rican regent, and with community-based organization leaders like at El Puente and other places, to try to underscore that what's on paper in Centro's mission about research engaging and being used for social policy, to impact on social policy. I see that as critical, and I try to add to it in the work that I'm doing with the rest of the team.
Well, I think on that note, I'd like to thank you for your coming and all your contributions. I just want to remind you of the last, again, enter all the dates in your calendar. We'll welcome you to the program. There are a couple of exciting things coming up, and take as many of these as you need for your students.